Good evening, friends. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Bonesy, thank you for joining me this evening. We're going to be discussing Sunday's sermon, but first of all, how are you, bro? I believe you spent the day like Red and Andy Dufresne on the roof, like Shawshank Redemption vibes.
Shawshank Redemption me. Yeah.
Did you have a good day of manual labor?
Yeah. It's been a hot day actually in Durban, and being on the roof at Springfield Park. But it's so blessed to be productive and have some work to do. And you, how are you keeping?
Yeah, it wasn't a hot day up in the mountains where I live. I'm still thawing out, but yeah, all is well. Thank you in the Taylor household. We're going to be discussing, as I said, Sunday's sermon and also the Chosen series that we've just started, and not just the sort of sermon series, but our reflections on the TV series as well. And so I just wanted to start by asking Bones what he's loving. I imagine that all of us will have different things that we're taking away that we're enjoying about this series and Sunday's preach. And so, bro, what's really resonating with you? What are you excited about?
Yeah, I'm really getting connected with the context and the environment that Jesus walked into at that time. I think no different to our context at the moment, with a lot of pain, a lot of sickness, a lot of frustration and anger across all communities, and I'm connecting with that more than ever, and seeing how Jesus enters into that space is really resonating with me, into that world of brokenness and the society of brokenness, is really impacting me quite a bit. So I'm enjoying this. I'm enjoying how we're interacting with this as a church as well. Yeah. You
earlier were saying that you feel, and maybe this sort of TV series is reminding you feel like you were really represented in that moment in sort of ancient history, which I found such a sort of interesting thing to say. Tell us how you felt and how you think many people were represented around the life of Christ.
Yeah, it's so incredible. I just feel like we were there. We were there in some other way as we were represented by Africans. We had Africans that were there. Yeah. We were represented in class. We were represented in our own experiences. I feel like, for me, that's what draws me to this.
Yeah, I get that.
Series is how we can connect with that time, even in this time.
Because it's too easy to read this and think of it as some fable a million miles away from your life. And so to go, that shepherd really gets me, that blue collar guy really gets me, or that like mainstream. I sometimes feel a bit, like Nicodemus, like great education, like working for the church, and his reactions with Jesus. Like, there's someone in the Bible that everyone can find that they relate to, and were in some way represented by. Yeah. And what you're saying is that this series is helping us to kind of see how they react to Jesus and get a clue as to how we can.
Yeah, absolutely. React. And I think that's the big thing that comes into the fore, is that there's a connection of Jesus that those people, there was a connection with the Messiah that those people were waiting for in anticipation of how he was going to come, and then there is that connection that is going to come, and how people are going to interact with that as we journey on.
And it just makes it so much easier to fall in love with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So cool. How are you interacting with this? How are you finding it?
Yeah, I love it. I'm gonna sort of repeat a line from Sunday, but I love that there aren't American accents. I love that it's been done faithfully and and shot beautifully. And the person of Jesus, like we all need to get really better at telling Jesus stories and understanding him. And so moments like this in the church's life, for me, just can't come around often enough.
Sure. I feel like, connecting with the sermon on Sunday, there's this thing that you alluded to, that Jesus is the treasure that opens all other treasures. What was that all about? What were you trying to say to our community there?
Okay, cool. So by way of answer, what's the first commandment? Spot test.
Spot test is love your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul.
Okay, so not obey your God. I mean, you're right, by the way. Like, you can't. That would have been. And like, say what you like about the role of the commandments in our New Testament, New Covenant way of living. The relationship with God, the whole premise for relating with God is not obey him with all your heart and soul.
Sure.
It's not glorify him, surprisingly. It's not know him. It's not even to improve it slightly to say like resemble him. I mean, we would say like you can get transformed back into the image bearer of God that you're designed to be. That's not the fundamental thing. The first and foremost thing is love him, which straight away you got to think that's a totally unfair commandment.
Sure.
Like, how do you tell someone
Sure.
to love something? I don't get to go around saying to everyone, you must love President Cyril Ramaphosa. Like, as much as I might want to say that, like, it would be ridiculous of me to just ask people, force people, judge people, command people to have essentially what we're talking about is an affection.
Wow.
Like, how do you generate affection? Because if that person was to say, I just don't like him, like, I don't love him, I don't get it, like, we don't click, that's kind of the end of the conversation.
Yeah.
But Christianity only works when we recognize that it's not a discussion of morals, it's not a discussion of behavior, it's a discussion of passion and affection and romance and relationship. And so if you're not getting Christianity right until you're falling in love, if you're still dealing with, I'm trying to behave well or know certain things, then according to the first commandment or like elsewhere where Jesus would say like, you know, if you love me, you'll obey my commands. Like everything is about loving God. And if we're still talking about obeying him or knowing him, then that means we've not even really got out of first gear. Sure. And so if you want to love him, then you need to know the person of Jesus. Because Jesus is desirable. Jesus is fascinating. Jesus is lovely. And so if we don't tell great stories about Jesus, then we're just ripping out the guts of how you're ever going to fall in love with God. Wow. And it becomes this conceptual thing. So that's why I think that it's so critical that we fall in love with Jesus, that we understand who he is. I mean, it's been said, like most Christians, the person they know best in their faith is probably their pastor and what he thinks about things. Sure. The person they know second best in their faith is probably the Apostle Paul. And generally speaking, Christians know Jesus like at best, third best out of all the big figures in their faith. Like that's just got to be fixed.
That's incredible.
So that's the first thing. The second reason why I think this opens up every other treasure, all the other needs that you have in your life, all the other things you long for, is because Jesus modeled living a wholehearted, passionate life better than anyone else. So he's got this razor-sharp intellect where he's winning arguments, but still somehow making people feel loved. Sure. He's got this like bleeding heart, like empathy. He's turned the dial up all the way to the top and snapped it off. Like he's got all the empathy in the world, and yet perfect boundaries. Wow. Which, like, I'm pretty low on empathy, which is why I can pat myself on the back for having relatively good boundaries. But anyone who actually has a human heart and feels, like struggles to say no when people present you with need. Yeah. Jesus could say yes and mean it, could say no and mean it, and yet could sense totally what people were going through and be gentle and generous and yet be fierce. Jesus lived adventure. Jesus was like, boys, come follow me. And that sounds too limited, actually, because he didn't just include men. Like, he included, like, the least women, slaves, children, everyone who shouldn't be expected. He says, come, let's go on a big adventure. Maybe we'll have somewhere to sleep. Maybe we won't. We'll figure out some food en route, like, epic adventure, and achieved this incredible legacy with his life. So those are just a few snapshots of, like, all the ways you want to live your best life. Yeah. Jesus did it. And here's what I think, I know this is a long, rambling answer, but here's what I think really he opens up all the other treasures. Many of us will have at some mountaintop moment a little taste of true pleasure or true satisfaction or true adventure or true meaning or these things that we're longing for. And you'll have that moment. Maybe you've been longing for it. Sometimes you get it. What I find for myself and the human beings, as far as I can understand that I know, is that we tend to crush those good moments because we need them too much. Yeah, it's what the Bible actually calls idolatry. Like you almost worship something or like rely on something that just is
just magnetic,
and it actually can't deliver. And so even if you get that moment when it's the stars have aligned and your needs are met, what we tend to do is now we kind of obsess on it. It's got to deliver. Because who knows when I'll get the next moment like this. And so not only does it have to deliver in the moment, I've got to post it and make sure enough people like it. Otherwise, that somehow devalues the moment. I've got to cling on for dear life to the memory of this moment. I'm aware generally around your late 30s or 40s that maybe some of your best moments have actually already come and gone. And so then you're always comparing your good moments now to how it might have been once upon a time. And we end up corrupting all these satisfying moments because we're asking them to be more than they were ever designed to be. Yeah. I am not just speaking Christianese when I say a relationship with Jesus, that wholehearted, passionate man. Yeah. underwrites your satisfaction
Sure.
in a way that then the other stuff is still important. It's still a blessing, but it's not indispensable. And so if it happens, I'll be grateful and enjoy it. If I lose it, I'll mourn it. But I'm not at risk. My satisfaction is not at risk.
Yeah.
The treasure, my experience of the treasures in this life is not crazy at risk if I already have this relationship with this deeply satisfying man, God, Jesus. And so that other stuff's still important. It's not like Christians must just float through life not noticing or caring. It's just that there's less at stake, which means we can actually enjoy those moments much more.
It's incredible, Paul. And I think you've hit a word for me that's just seemed to stick, that I almost starting to resonate a little bit, is satisfaction. Satisfaction, right? And it almost seems like as human beings, we're wanting to be satisfied by something.
Yeah.
It's not the same for everybody, but there's an inherent need to satisfy something within us, and that thing is not always fulfilling when it comes. But then you've alluded to the relationship with Jesus, and how does He meet that desire, that need to satisfy something, whether it's career growth, finding purpose is something that you desire for satisfying. Health is anything that looks like it.
Yeah.
And how does Jesus enter into into that in terms of our relationship?
Yeah.
With Him?
Well, and that's the right question for people to start to be asking. I think we spend a lot of time thinking our desires are wrong.
Yeah.
Like, let's just get over that. We spend a lot of time thinking that God is unaware of what we are longing for, and in our deepest, darkest corners of our hearts longing for. Like, let's just bring all that stuff into the open and go, He lived deeply satisfied. He wants to bring you into a way of living deeply satisfied, even in suffering, even in moments where, the temporal, earthly satisfactions come and go. He can still, as I say, sort of underwrite.
Wow.
And so that is the framework for me for having a relationship with God or doing faith. It's a journey of desire and needs being satisfied. And so if you don't know Jesus, who perfectly embodies it, once again, you're just ripping the guts out of all that can be great about this whole thing.
I'm keen to understand a little bit further on that law number one that we spoke about, right? That commandment number one, which is love as a commandment, but it's how can it be?
Yeah.
And then it shows up again somewhere in the Bible where Jesus is with his disciples and he says to them, I'm giving you a new commandment. And he's not saying a new obedience, a new thing. It says a new commandment, and that commandment is to love. So for him, like you say, there was this deep-rooted connection to love. Why is that? I mean, I often even think of how he connected with us in humanity. Like, think of the death of Lazarus, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing when he got to the tomb there is he didn't go heal. He went and cried.
Yeah.
And he wept.
Yeah.
And he said, as he loved him. That's what they're saying. Why is this love so deeply rooted in how we experience Jesus?
Yeah, that just is who God is.
Sure.
And I suspect we are simultaneously so desperate for love and fill newsstands with magazines on how to do it and books about how to
10 new ways.
or love stories, and we're forever trying to disappear into some fancy we're very interested in love as human beings, and we're really bad at it, really, really bad at it. And God just is love. And so I don't have a fancy answer to your question other than I think that is the intersection between where who God is actually the answer to pretty much all the questions that humans have always been asking. Yeah. And if we can just admit for a moment, we've not been able to sustainably answer this question, and yet we're longing for it. C.S. Lewis said, if you find within yourself a desire that nothing on this earth can satisfy, the only logical explanation for that is that you were designed for a different earth.
Wow.
And I think when you start talking about love, that's one of the ways that I think C.S. Lewis was right. I think there are others. We have this idea of eternity as well, and perfection and other things which on earth are invisible. But perfect love is something we all not only long for, but actually think we have the right to.
Sure.
And I don't even think that's wrong. I think children have the right to be loved, and yet none of them are perfectly loved. And yet God is that. And so, I suspect that this love conversation is always going to come up when you have God crash into mankind.
That is incredible, and you allude to who God is, and in the series that we're in and the sermons that we are preaching, we start to see Jesus proclaiming who he is. And one of the things that he says at a in a context where law was law and law was deeply rooted into the fabric of society, is he was the Son of Man. Why would he allude to himself as the Son of Man?
That's a really interesting question. I've even heard atheists sort of quote the fact that Jesus calls himself the Son of Man more than he calls himself anything else. That's his favorite way of referring to himself. And I've heard atheists go like, you guys say, once again, maybe Paul has invented this whole thing, the Apostle Paul, around a guy who is actually going around saying, I'm just a man. So is that what Jesus was saying when he said Son of Man? I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but I find it gives us a quite interesting clue into Jesus' modus operandi. On the surface, that is a slightly incognito thing for Jesus to call himself. Son of Man is kind of, Isaiah uses it, it's sort of like a generic term for a human being, actually. So to call yourself a Son of Man is kind of like just to call yourself, I suppose we would say mankind today, or like a human being.
Sure.
And so on one sort of level, he is just giving a kind of generic term for himself. And Jesus went to quite great lengths to tell his disciples, like, or someone he'd done a miracle for, hey, don't go and shout at the fact that I'm the Messiah. So Jesus was trying to be incognito. At one very winsome level, I think it's just because he was humble.
Sure.
I think at a strategic level, it's because Jesus was quite aware of when he wanted this wave of popularity to start to break, and he was quite nervous to let this whole thing kind of get wild around him, because we're starting to understand through this series that there was this desire for a military leader and a coup to overthrow Rome. Yeah.
Big horse.
Exactly.
Or even
and
a
so
dragon.
I think Jesus was so aware that one wrong move and he could light that powder keg, and they would try and turn him into their military messiah.
Yeah.
So I think there was a strategic reason why he was keeping it incognito as well as just being humble. But there's actually like a sneaky subtext. There's like a meta thing going on here with Jesus when he calls himself the Son of Man. So as I say, Isaiah uses it as like a generic term for people. Psalm 80, you also see it in there as a sort of generic term for just a person, although already Psalm 80 is about God saving his people. And so some would argue like already the term Son of Man is being upgraded slightly in Psalm 80. But in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel's the most badass prophet, if you could call a prophet bad. Like he just like names it like generations to come, like exactly who's going to invade who and so on. And there's from verse 13 of chapter 7, it says, the Son of Man is given dominion. And Daniel speaks about how, behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him, and to him was given dominion. And Daniel has just been speaking about all these dreadful forces and beasts and sort of spiritual powers that are going to hold the world captive. To him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. I mean, like, Daniel is talking not about a cool military leader like Joshua. Daniel is talking about the ultimate savior. And he uses this phrase, Son of Man. So when Jesus says, I'm the Son of Man, he's saying on the one level, I'm just like you guys. But then in the subtext, he's saying, those of you who know your Daniel will wonder if I'm referring to this ultimate Son of Man who's coming. And that's something that Jesus does a lot. Like with parables the whole time, he's always like on the surface confusing you if you're not coming with the right frame of mind. But if you are coming with the right frame of mind, then it opens up. The parables are almost like these kind of truth-protecting ways of communicating. Like if you arrive with the wrong frame of mind, you're going to miss it. But if you come with the correct frame of mind, then the parable opens up to you. Now, I don't have a kind of answer to this question, but it does make me ask the question, is there a way for me to approach Jesus that will open up more of him? And then by the same token, is there a way, a posture of my heart that I can approach Jesus which will close off some of what I could see of him, that the revelation of him will be dimmed? And that's just a question I think all of us should ask.
Absolutely.
Like, great, you're going to Jesus, you're trying to find out about him, but there's a posture that your heart can have. And as I said, I don't know all the details of what this is. I could speculate, but I won't know. But Jesus seems to go, I don't just want you to come to me. I want you to come to me in a certain way.
Wow, sure.
And there is a way that you can come to me that you will miss the point slightly. And there's a way that you can come to me that it will really open up. And that's just a fascinating idea for me. So that Son of Man thing is an example of how Jesus always has this like, there's the PR and then there's the truth behind it. And he's like wanting you to really push in and find out more.
And lean in a little bit. And one of the things I'm deeply interested in that context of the society that Jesus was going into is this relationship with the Pharisees and the relationship with the Romans. So the Romans were conquerors. They'd come in, and yet they required or needed or knew they had to have a relationship with the Pharisees in order to govern to a certain degree, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Hey, it's almost like the way to make this thing work is to have the church.
Yeah.
Like, otherwise, this thing all falls
Yeah.
apart. What's up with that? I'm always quite interested. Yeah,
It's a good question. I mean, the Pharisees are the kind of pantomime villain in the story, and yet maybe they don't get as much sympathy as they probably should, because these were guys who were really zealous for God, and we also know that many of them became disciples of Jesus in the long run. But yeah, the thing about ancient Israel then, and to a lesser extent, even kind of, you can still see this in Israel today. I've had the privilege to go there twice. That country is a theocracy, not a democracy, not a monarchy, a theocracy.
Right.
In other words, their faith, their religion, is the highest source of structure to that society.
Sure.
Now, we really can't imagine that. Like, even a country like America that would claim to be, like a kind of Christian nation, or, has like the Bible as its, doesn't get anywhere near, because there are still, there's parliament and there's police and there are these other forces that, and there's a kind of a constitution or whatever.
Yeah.
In Israel, even today, bro, there's a whole like party in the Knesset, which is the Israeli parliament, which is made up of Orthodox Jews who don't get voted in, who might not. There's no risk that they might lose their seat. It's like codified into the way that country was reformed in the 40s or whenever it was. That these guys will always have a vote to represent the kind of scriptural view. Now that's like whatever they have now, a third or 15% or whatever they have, how many seats they have now. And their job, they're paid by the state to study the Torah in Israel today. Today, the part of the national budget is devoted to sponsoring guys to simply be Jewish.
Sure.
And those guys are intimidating. Those guys wield quite a lot of power. The papers often have things to say about what they say about the latest, whatever.
Sure.
Now, in Jesus' day, that wasn't part of the Knesset. That just was the Knesset. So when Jesus takes on the Pharisees and the chief priests and the scribes, and we get these amazing parables where he's comparing them to, like really unfavorably and going like, you've blown it. He's not taking on the church in the way that it feels like if you take on the church today, it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't pick that fight, but it's not really. Like, that was the only fight he could pick. That was the biggest fight he could pick, because even Rome in taking over Israel and trying to rule that place, recognized we've got to work through these guys because this is a theocracy. So if we cut off the chief priests, this place will be ungovernable. So that's why Pilate is under pressure to appease the priests and so on, because he recognizes these guys have huge political power, huge. So that's the piece about the Pharisees for me, is that these are guys with not just religious power, but with legislated sort of civic power. And those two ideas are really meshed as one idea in a theocracy like Israel was at the time.
Sure, that is hugely insightful. I mean, the way that the series even depicts that. I remember part of it where Nicodemus is teaching, and he's saying to his students or the other Pharisees that one shouldn't eat the fish of someone who's fished on the Sabbath. Yeah, he says because that hand has touched it and it's come into your body like. Yeah,
so I mean, it's like if you didn't turn up for at the synagogue on Sabbath. Maybe we're going on a tangent here, but like it's quite cool. The day that Jesus is teaching at the synagogue, everyone's keen to be there. But on every other day, you have to be there. On Sabbath, you actually have to run to synagogue to show that you're keen to be there. You have to rush, even if you really wish you were somewhere else. If you don't turn up at synagogue and the rabbi and elders start to notice, you're like not going to make deals on Monday because you're going to get frozen out of the economy. So like have that mindset. That religious structure it governed everything. Who you got to marry, who you got to do business with, where you got to like all that stuff. So yeah, when Jesus takes on a religious thing, he's taking on everything for the Jews, which is why once again when he says, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments. He's talking to guys where it's like, it's not interesting to tell them to obey God. That's meat and drink. That's what you've grown up on. You obey God. You obey. When Jesus says, if you love me, you'll obey my commandments. We read that going like, is Jesus trying to manipulate us into obeying him? The guys he's talking to, they take it as read. You obey God. What he's saying is, the obedience bit will take care of itself if you love me.
Just
Love me. That's the real important piece of that statement.
Man, I don't know how you guys are feeling with this topic, but I'm truly inspired, and even going into episode 3, and episode 3 starts dealing with the relationship that Jesus had with children, right? And I often look at how it was depicted, and it was so genuine, and it was so pure and authentic. I think that is it. And even Jesus alludes to a faith-like child in his preaching. Yeah. Why did he connect with children so much?
I always judge these kinds of dramatizations of Jesus' life on how well the actor does in capturing the relationship with children. That's one of the things about The Passion that I didn't love that much, is Jesus isn't quite as approachable as I think he was in real life. How can we know? I think possibly the kind of honest selfishness of children really appeals to God. Because if the whole thing is a discussion of desire and need, if God's going, I want you to love me, I want you to find me satisfying, then all of us with our moralizing and our self-discipline and our delayed gratification and all the stuff that we've grown up to have, in some ways we almost put blocks between ourselves and the great need meter. Jesus. Whereas kids are just like, you've got something I want.
Come on.
And kids, as we've said not that long ago, are good at figuring out who to trust. So I think Jesus is going, you guys automatically trust me, and you're coming to me a little bit consumeristically, and I love it. And that's part of it. Bro, we're under a bit of time pressure. I wanted to ask you what it is that you're most excited for this series to achieve in our church.
Yeah, man. Part of what I've seen, especially in this episode 3, is again looking at the relationship that Jesus had with children. And I often allude to, he says to the kids in the series that who knows the Sheba, and these kids all put up their hands and they go, yeah, we do, and he's okay, say it, and these kids recite it. But I see such an emotional depiction of him looking at these kids saying this powerful statement of love and connection with God. And it often makes me rethink of the songs that we often sing at church and the prayers that we've often prayed that have just become stuff that we know and stuff that we don't connect with. And as we grow, and sometimes you feel it. So I remember I went to an Anglican boarding school, so we sang hymns, right? And we sang hymns without even looking at the hymn books because we knew them. But in sort of knowing Christ a little bit deeper and connecting with him, there was times when I could just be like, blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. And that statement would move me, because there's a promise in there, Or you could sing Amazing Grace, it talks about it was grace that saved me, that I was blind, but now that I can see. And these things, you can wash over them, but then there's moments where you really connect with this. And I'm excited about that part, because the one thing that we don't want this to be is another history lesson, right? Yeah. This is not a theological refresh. It's not here to do a multiple choice question about what you know, what you don't know.
You used to call him Jesus, now you call him Yeshua. Well done. It's not about.
So we're not about that vibe, and I'm starting to lean in a lot on a reconnection through this love that Jesus commands, but that is so innately in our desire, in our requirement, in our satisfaction.
That's right. For me too, bro. I mean, I don't know if it's too much to say, but if I have a vivid relationship with a deeply satisfying, amazing man, Jesus, who is underwriting my satisfaction in life, does it make it less likely that I'm going to fall for fake news?
Exactly.
I suspect possibly. Does it make it less likely I'm going to jump on some conspiracy theory or fly off the handle by people who believe slightly differently from me, whose statements are sort of threatening all the stuff that we're getting wrong at the moment, that human beings are getting wrong. We're getting wrong because we're afraid. And when you're afraid, when you're under stress, you get all this this amygdala hijack they talk about, where like adrenaline pumps into your system. Like all of us have been running on adrenaline for months, where you can't be creative, where you don't have proper blood flow to your brain, where you're likely to flick into self-defense, because we feel like our needs are not guaranteed to be met, like we used to think they were in the ancient days of 2019.
Yeah.
You know? If I have a vivid, satisfying relationship with Jesus, I think I'm much more likely to be able to respond with grace, creativity, see opportunities, find ways to mend fences, not blow my lid and end up breaking relationships and having a mess to clean up on my Facebook page. Like, so much of what people are getting wrong at the moment, I think they have so much more likelihood of getting it right if they are connected to Jesus. And so that's not just churchy talk. That's why I think a series like this is just that little prompt. It's just that nudge to remind you he really is as good as he says he is, and it can draw us back into relationship with him.
So, I mean, there's, even in our context right now, there's a lot of people are going through hard times, and a lot of people are in periods of flourishing, you know, and not in the PPE kind of way, but in the most sincere, genuine way that God is blessing them with a favor, right? And we can be connected to compare, you know, in this season.
Comparison is a cancer, bro, and so that's where a connection with Jesus just solves all of that. I want to let them start to chat now. Cool. We could enjoy ourselves for ages, but I want you guys to. There are really two big questions that I think will take you a decent distance into your chat. And the first one is simply, what at the moment is your favorite thing about Jesus?
Sure.
Okay, so you don't have to come up with the Sunday school, you know, front of the, you know, like gold star, best in the class, like it's because he's the Son of God. Is that the right answer? Like, don't give us the right answer. Just as you think about him, as you maybe are catching a few new glimpses of him in this conversation and Sundays, and whether you've had a chance to watch the TV series or not, what right now is the thing that you just enjoy about Jesus the most? That's the first thing that I think is a really interesting conversation, because God has wired a desire for Jesus into you, which means without wanting to put the cart before the horse, once you admit to yourself, that's the thing I love about Jesus the most, you often don't realize you're busy describing the thing God loves about you the most, strangely, because you're designed in his image. And so as you go after that characteristic of Jesus, and most of us are too insecure to even admit that this might be true, but God may well be saying, well, my son, my daughter, I actually want to invite you into living in that same way. But that might sort of blow your mind too much to allow you to answer the question properly. So just start with, what is it that you love about Jesus the most? And then allow the conversation possibly to talk about what that might mean for you. And then the second question is going to require some vulnerability, but the degree to which you engage with this, I think, is the degree to which you're going to get huge fruit out of this conversation. And it's simply, what is an area of your life right now that is dissatisfying? And please don't just describe the circumstances. Oh, like, my boss sucks. Like, cool, I'm sorry to hear that, but there's nothing I can do with that. But tell me, here's the language I want you to use. I need to feel X. I have this need, and it is currently being frustrated. It's currently not being satisfied. Because getting our needs satisfied is what drives everything we do, and it is what God is wanting us to come to him with. So if you can describe in the terms of need, what it is that's currently dissatisfying in your life right now, and be vulnerable enough to admit that, then your group can start to pray with you and start to help you to figure out, well, how might the person of Jesus, even before we put nice, neat bows on it and work out exactly how he's going to solve that in your life, just what is in the personality of Jesus and his way of living that looks like it might be the solution to that need? That, I think, can be a really great conversation. And so I trust that you enjoy that. Thank you for being with us all this time, and I hope that's been a fun conversation to eavesdrop on. We've enjoyed, even virtually, being in your lounge and being with you. Bones, thank you for your time, bro.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, guys, so good to connect with you again. It's really awesome to have a relationship with you in whatever way possible. So we love this part here.
Yeah, cool. See you soon. See you on Sunday. God bless.